For this lesson, you need to open a new blank Excel workbook. This lesson introduces apps. The word app is short for application. Apps are a new feature for Excel 2013. Apps allow programmers to create new components that you can add to a workbook. These components can add functionality that isn't present in the Excel product. Apps can take two forms: task pane apps and content apps. First, I'll explain how task pane apps work, and then we'll move on to content apps. You've already encountered a task pane in Lesson 3.7. Let's have another look at the clipboard task pane that you used. I'll click the Home tab on the ribbon, and in the clipboard group, the Dialog Launcher. And here's the clipboard task pane. It sits on the side of the screen, and it usually allows you to copy content to and from a worksheet. I'll now close the clipboard task pane that is part of Excel, and we'll add an app that isn't part of Excel, one that was written by a third-party developer. In order to follow through with this lesson, you'll need to be connected to the internet and logged in to a Microsoft account. You'll learn more about Microsoft accounts in Session 8, Cloud Computing. So I'll click the Insert tab on the ribbon, and notice there's an Apps group. And in the Apps group, there's a Store button. I'll click the Store button now, and you can see that apps are another way for Microsoft to make some money, because some of the apps are for sale, and some of them are free. If I scroll down the list here, I can see a very expensive app there, the ePerf Tool Professional. It's $749.99. The apps that you see may be very different to the ones you're seeing on your screen now. That's because the internet is constantly changing, and there may be more apps available, and some of the existing apps may cease to be available by the time you watch this video. We'll now open a task pane app. Let me scroll down the list and look for a good one. Wikipedia have a task pane app. Let's give that a click now, and when I click the Wikipedia icon, a dialog appears asking you whether you want to trust Wikipedia. You can see that you're giving the Wikipedia task pane the ability to read and make changes to your documents, and also to send data over the internet. This is necessary, of course, because you have to receive the pages from Wikipedia, and you'd like to be able to cut and paste information from the task pane into your document. So I'll click Trust It to trust Wikipedia. And now a Wikipedia task pane has appeared. Let's ask it a question. I'd like to know about Microsoft Excel 2013. Information is now retrieved from the internet about Microsoft Excel, and I can see that the first option seems to be the right article for me. So I'll click Microsoft Excel, and I can now see a lot of information about Microsoft Excel. And if I wanted to copy any of this information into my workbook, I could highlight it, copy and paste, and I'd have the information within the worksheet itself. But I'll delete that row now because I don't really want that in my worksheet. I'll now close the Wikipedia task pane app by clicking the Close button in the top right corner. Now let's talk about a different type of app, the Content app. Up until now, most developers have found the main requirement for content apps is to add new types of chart and other visual display devices to Excel. Let's imagine a requirement. I've got a greenhouse and I want to make sure that the temperature stays within a certain range. So I'll add some labels. Temperature today, maximum temperature, and minimum temperature. And I'm going to imagine that the temperature today is 32 degrees. The maximum temperature allowed is 29 degrees, and the minimum temperature allowed is 21 degrees. I'd like to express this data visually, and in my mind I have the idea that I'd like a circular gauge with a needle pointing to today's temperature. And I'd like the acceptable temperature range, 21 to 29 degrees, to be shaded in green. And if the temperature goes above 29 degrees, I'd like that part of the gauge to be shaded in red. Well, that's a very nice, well-defined requirement, but unfortunately, nowhere in Excel is there any such thing as a gauge control. It just doesn't exist in the Excel product. However, it's likely that a developer may have written a gauge control as a content app. So let's see whether anybody has. I'll click the Insert tab on the ribbon, and in the Apps group, I'll go for the store. And I'm going to search the store by clicking in the search box and typing gauge. And when I press the Enter key, I can see that somebody has written a gauge app for Excel. And best of all, it's free. So I'll click the Add button to add the gauge app to Excel. And I can see that I'm being asked to trust this app, so I'll click the Trust It button. I'm now presented with two simple instructions. Click the Insert Gauges button to select the cells I want to visualize, and then use the Settings button to modify the gauge. So I'll click the Insert Gauges button, and the temperature I want the dial to point to is the temperature today. So I'll click once in cell B3 and then click the OK button. And I have a gauge, except the shaded portions of the gauge aren't the portions that I want shaded on my gauge. So I'll click that Settings button and see if I can change this. I click the Settings button and I can see first of all which minimum and maximum values do I want my temperature gauge to go from and to. Well, in this part of the world it rarely drops below 10 degrees and it never exceeds 50 degrees. Let's now look at the green range. That's the range that's okay. Well, the minimum temperature is 21. I can see that in cell B5, and the maximum value stated in cell B4 is 29 degrees. I don't think I'll bother with a yellow range on this gauge. And for my red range, it will be anything over 29 degrees up to the maximum value of 50 degrees. So I'll put the numbers in 29 to 50. Then I can click the back button and see what my gauge looks like. Well, that's exactly the gauge I wanted. I can see the green range and the red range. And I can see that I'd better open some of the windows in my greenhouse or some of my plants might have a problem. You don't need to save this workbook unless you want to. I'm going to close mine without saving. And you've now completed lesson 317. Add an app to a workbook.